Okay, we're going to jump right back into it. I had wanted to finish up the verse last week. Who is this coming up from the wilderness? And it stretched a little longer than we anticipated. So we're going to finish it this week. And that means next week we can start the next verse, which is the couch of Solomon surrounded by 60 mighty men, which promises to be equally as interesting once we unpack what the context is of some of those words. So we'll finish this up. And what I want to do first is I've slid back 2 or 3 lessons here just to remind you of the context again. Remember, there was perhaps a mistaken identity where rather than perceiving the children of Israel properly in the wilderness, the nations surrounding them kind of misunderstood what they were seeing. And you can't really blame them because there were so many miracles going on in the camp, especially as it concerned, the pillars, plural, of fire being miraculous, the miraculous water, the miraculous food, just a completely miraculous existence. So you can see why they might have mistaken the Israelites and believed that they had somehow been elevated to the status of gods, some sort of celestial beings, which we know they weren't. They were just human beings. And at least for that period where they were building the Mishkan together, they were in a rare state of unity. It was truly a very short golden age for the Israelites, and a great lesson for us too. If we can get into unity, we can be perceived as being very powerful to the outside world. But again, they thought they were these ministers of fire in the wilderness, and of course we know it's the angels who are the ministers of fire. And we looked at a particular phrase, Esh Lohet. And it comes from Psalm 104:4, where it says he makes the winds his messengers, flaming fire his ministers, which reminds us of everything we learned about the way that the tribes were encamped in the wilderness, facing the 4 different directions, how there's the angels of the 4 winds that it seems like their actions kind of ignite events of interest to the entire world, because those 4 winds do affect the entire world. So there's a reference here to the flaming fire, that the angels are this flaming fire, are his ministers, the Esh Lohet, and how they become his personal servants. But we're also this week going to take a gander at a verse that might help us to understand why the Israelites would have been confused for these flaming ministers of fire or angels, because there is a scripture that seems to draw a parallel, and they're putting it back into the context again with the match that Jacob had with the angel all night long. Right, but I did want to reintroduce you to that phrase, Esh Lohet, the flaming fire. Right, so whether we're talking about the ministers of fire as angels, or whether human beings can function in that capacity, that's our reference point. Okay, now we're going to fast forward. Yeah, maybe we'll back up to right here. We ended last week with this passage in Acts. And again, it was an angelic encounter that Peter had, and we knew that it was in the context of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, that he was in prison during that week. And Herod got the idea that, well, I won't kill him during the week of Unleavened Bread. It'll get people riled up. So after the days of Unleavened Bread, I'll bring him out and I'll kill him. Well, we know the story. There was a miracle. The angel appeared in the prison cell. Doesn't even break him out. It's just like everything opens up. There's just the chains fall off. The iron gate opens up. And so this is very miraculous. And of course, Passover, it is a season of miracles. It's the season of our freedom. And so all the little things that even the angel is telling Peter, we can put back into the context of Passover, like get up quickly. Even Yeshua had to keep waking Peter up during the Passover season. So apparently Peter was a sound sleeper. He says, get up quickly. This is something you would say at Passover. You have to do what you're doing quickly. The chains fell off his hands. He's going to be able to go free. It's the season of freedom. He says, put on your belt, strap on your sandals. That's how you're supposed to eat the Passover meal, in just that fashion. Wrap your cloak around you and follow me. So he goes out and he escapes the realm of death. But our comparison point, and then we backed up and we said, okay, that was a great miracle. That was a great testimony. That's something that I'm sure spread like wildfire. But when we backed up to the beginning of the chapter, and that is the wrong chapter, by the way. I never did go back and fix that. It should be chapter 7. We see that just prior to this great miracle, James, the brother of John, who would have been one of Peter's besties, Peter, James, and John, the three amigos, out of those three, we know that James was beheaded. And so that had to have been a terrible disappointment, not just to John, his brother, but to Peter, because it seems like they were always hanging around together. They were very close to Yeshua. They were able to visualize the Sukkot of glory when they went to the Mount of Transfiguration with him. And so right within the same context, we've got two completely different outcomes. We have James being executed with the sword and Peter being miraculously rescued. And so our topic was, should we look for a miracle? Should we look for a sign or a wonder? And so this is kind of a hint to get us kicked off tonight. Should we rely on a sign or a wonder? Should we rely on a miracle to know whether it's coming from heaven or somewhere else? Well, if we look at this example, it's kind of a 50-50 thing, whether a miracle will be forthcoming. We have James, who didn't have the miracle. And then right after him, we have Peter, who has the miracle. So would we look at James, may his memory be for blessing? Would we look, his name would be Yaakov. Would we look at Yaakov and say that he was not righteous enough? He wasn't zealous enough. He wasn't saved enough. And because somehow Yaakov fell short, he died by the sword, whereas Peter was sprung out of prison. We would never say that. There's no hint in scripture that there was obviously disciples who were closer to Yeshua than others, but it didn't seem to have much bearing on how they died. As far as we know, there's really only one that escaped the sword eventually, and that would have been James's brother John. He lived out his life in exile, as far as we know. So if we compare these two disciples who walked with Yeshua, should we stand back and say, you know what, if it's truly a move of the Holy Spirit, then there will be miracles and signs following. Always. Will the righteous person always have miracles and signs following? Well, I don't think we can say that based on this example, because James doesn't get the miracle. Peter does. It doesn't mean that, Yaakov of blessed memory was inferior to Peter. Maybe on the contrary, maybe, if we look at Kepha, he's denying Yeshua, cursing, saying, I don't know the man. So we're not going to be able to weigh out righteousness against righteousness and say this person deserves a miracle and this one doesn't. And I think we need to keep that in mind in this day and time, because we're going to see righteous people fall. And we don't need to second guess the purposes of the Holy One and say, if they'd truly been a disciple of Yeshua, there would have been a miracle forthcoming. They would have been healed, or they wouldn't have suffered that terrible accident. We can't say those things. Our times are in the hands of the Father. So, are signs and miracles and wonders, are they wonderful to behold? Are they pleasant? Are they great testimonies? Do they energize us? Are we able to pick up the phone or run out and tell people what a great deliverance we just witnessed or we just heard about? Sure. It's awesome when we have something like that to share. But when we seek after a sign, we can be entrapped by what we're calling eye candy, because remember, it's the eye that's looking for the sign. It's not. Just a moment. The ear is going to Shema Yisrael. It's going to hear. It's going to listen. But the eyes, remember, we're told to put tzitzit on our garments because our eyes stray after things. Our ears can stray, sure. But what is the most distractible part of our body? It's going to be our eyes. Why has television had such a revolutionary effect on the morals of the United States? And I'm assuming other nations as well, if they watch TV or movies equally as much as the United States. It's what you're seeing. And because you let it entertain your eyes, then you start to listen to it too. You start to entertain it with your ears. So we have to be careful about eye candy. Things can be passed off as signs, wonders, miracles, and religious works. But we have to look deeper than that. We have to go beyond what we see with the eyes. That was one of the things with the fruit in the Garden of Eden. It looked good. And when things look good, we want to believe they are good. But just because something looks good does not mean it is good. Often that which is evil looks good. So we're not promised when we're going to see a great sign or a wonder. We don't know when we're going to see the spectacular or when we're expected to hear a still small voice. Even the apostles, if we keep reading about the apostles, I mean, we just had the example here of James and Peter. If we keep reading about the lives of the apostles, then what we realize is, hey, they didn't always know either. Sometimes it seemed like they did know when they were going to be able to perform a miracle. It doesn't always seem like they did. The strange things would happen, like, touch this piece of cloth and I'm going to take it to somebody and they're going to be healed. Well, why couldn't they just speak the word? Apparently, you don't always know how the Spirit is going to work. And so remember that word mofet that we learned last week that is derived from yafa, which means handsome, beautiful, attractive. So this wonder, this mofet, it would be very attractive. It would be a great thing to be able to go tell people about. And here's the danger of that. And it's not that signs and miracles are bad. They're not. It's how we deal with them that can be bad. That's what we're learning right now. We want to learn how to guard our heart so that we approach a sign or a wonder competently according to the word, so that we won't be distracted by an illusion, by a deception. Because we're told in very plain language that can happen. It says, if possible, even the very elect can be deceived. So if even the very elect can be deceived, we need to make sure that we're not one of them. That we know the Father gave us a a guidebook. He gave us examples. He gave us things to follow. And so one thing that we can start off is understand that the Spirit does not work in each situation the exact same way that it did the last time. Elijah was shown that. You might hear the voice from the whirlwind, but you might also hear the still small voice. You might see something as big as the size of a man's hand, or you might see a great thunderstorm that would cover Mount Sinai, and the heavens would drip with rain, and the words would be on fire. You don't know exactly how it's going to appear to you in any given situation. So just the fact that something spectacular happens is not proof positive that it came from a heavenly source. Just like we couldn't have predicted, had we just sat in on Yeshua's last words with his disciples before he ascended, and somebody said, hey, look around and guess what's gonna happen to all 12 of these guys. In fact, I want you to also guess, let's just go on into Acts. All these people who are gathered around in Acts chapter 2 in the temple, and they're praying and the Spirit falls. We know it's a larger number of people. You've got men and women joined together. You got all these chances here. Point out each one of them and tell me what you think their end will be. Will each of them die enjoying such a great miracle as they're going to enjoy in Acts chapter 2 at Shavuot? Or will their ends perhaps be less spectacular? We don't know. We don't know whether we're going to die in captivity. We don't know if we're going to be put to death. We don't know if we're going to be translated in a chariot. We don't know if we're going to die in exile. We don't know those things. And I think this is why Yeshua was very careful, because people are always challenging him. They were always wanting miracles. He accused one crowd, like, they're just following me for the bread. That's all they want. They want the free food. That's what they're after. They're not really after transformation. And that's kind of my thing that I'm stuck on right now. There are a lot of people who want information, but there are very few people who want to learn. And see if that is not so in your life. You'll encounter lots of people who want information. It doesn't mean they want to learn or to become a disciple. They don't want to see the change as a result of the information, because the information can make you very proud and it can make you very arrogant. And I think looking at the example of the disciples and the apostles, that should sober us and say, you know what, the closer you walk with Yeshua, the greater the price. You might see great miracles, but then when you need one yourself, you may not get one. And so Yeshua was reminding his doubters, they're challenging him, are you the Messiah or not? Tell us plainly. His language says, judge me by my works. And by works, we don't necessarily mean miracles. He's not saying, look at the bread, look at the sick people I've healed, look at the raising from the dead. He doesn't really say that. And we're going to look, what is he talking about when he says, judge me by my works? Why wouldn't he say, judge me by the signs and the miracles? And at one point he does say, if nothing else, believe the signs, but he's saying that's inferior. If you have to have a spectacular sign or miracle to believe me and understand who I am, that's inferior. But if that's the only way you can do it, do it. On the other hand, if you're relying on miracles, if you're relying on spectacular things, you are more vulnerable to a sorcerer, because a sorcerer can produce a seemingly astounding miracle. They can do it. Pharaoh's magicians could do it. They had sorcerers in the New Testament. They could do things. They were drawing from a different power, but they could produce an illusion, a deception, especially if you wanted to believe it. The more you wanted to believe it, apparently, the more susceptible you are to believing that what you're seeing is actually true. when no, it's coming from sorcery. Because what a sorcerer cannot do in the long term is produce obedience to the word. Not in the long term. Can he do it short term? Absolutely. What does it say? Even the demons believe and tremble. They know the information. It doesn't mean that it's transformed anything in them. But a sorcerer, somebody who's trying to deceive you with a sign, a wonder, or a miracle, before you believe that sign, wonder, or miracle, watch their life. Watch it long term. The new kid on the block needs to remain the new kid on the block until there's a real good character evaluation. And troubles and trials are often going to be the pressure that kind of presses out. So what's oozing out of this person, we can see whether it's poison or whether it's truly the righteousness of Yeshua oozing out of them under pressure. And that is my prayer right now. Like, the longer I go, the closer I get to my death date than my birth date, the more I want that pressure to start running clear righteousness. We had a congregational cleanup day yesterday, and we have a lot of trees. We're in the Daniel Boone National Forest, so we get a lot of debris down on the roof. And so Jimmy had brought the power sprayer, and I climbed up on the roof, and it's not as spectacular as it sounds, believe me. But I would work my way down the roof, not just spraying out debris, but also making sure that the trash, the mud and the leaves and things, that they would be, forced down through the gutter because they were stopped up. And once we kind of got that power washer in there, then all of a sudden it just, you could see all the mud and junk come out the bottom. And so he was watching, and he let me know when now the water's coming out clear. Now we know the gutter's truly clear. And I think that's what I want to see in my life right now. Because, if you're operational, you're going to get some mud and leaves in your gutter. It's just, that's the way the seasons work. But what do you want? You don't want it to get clogged with the mud and the leaves. You want that water, that rain of the Holy Spirit, you want it to just keep working in you, so that if there is any mud left over in there, leaves, junk, spiders, itsy bitsy and much bigger bitsy, you want to see that muddy water start running clear under the pressure wash. And it's not pleasant when he crushes us, especially as we walked with him for a while and we think, am I not over this? Am I not better than this? I really thought I would do better at this point. I really thought my thought process would be much improved at this point. And look at me. Look at the thought I just thought. That's mud. That's not clear water. So if you got to keep pressing me to show me what's still in there, so I'll keep working to get the mud out, keep pressing me. Because there's no spectacular sign, miracle, or wonder that I would want him to give me more than the clear water of a righteous life before him. Obedience to his word. That's what's really important. Let anybody else do a miracle if it means he's got to work on me to make me run clear. And Yeshua emphasized that. Don't put so much emphasis on the miracles and the signs and the wonders. They're going to follow, but that's the whole thing. They follow at the appointed time. They follow in the Father's timing. And often they're not linked to your righteousness. He can use some absolute rascals to do miracles if he wants to. That's not the miraculous thing. We have to acknowledge then, like, it's from heaven. It's not on account of our righteousness. It's just on account of our being willing in that moment. But in the long term, so that we won't become arrogant, should we have a great gift of healing or whatever it might be, intercession, if there's some gift that he gives us that people really admire, that truly puts us in a danger zone. Because the character, it needs to measure up to the gift, because Yeshua is saying, judge me by my works. Don't judge me by my miracles. Judge me by my works. Yeah, I can do miracles. Yeah, I can do signs and wonders. No problem. So can a sorcerer. But I want you to judge me by my works. Not that which astounds you, not that which is beautiful in your eyes, but that which is beautiful in the eyes of the Father, and that is obedience. Okay. Well, that turned out to be kind of a long summary. All right, so back to our verse in Song of Songs, where again, the dust of Jacob is related to the dust that was kicked up in Jacob's wrestling match with the angel. And remember, angels are, well, where did that come from? Go away. There we go. I need to quit touching things. We read in our verse when we started off in the psalm where angels are referred to flaming ministers of fire, right? And so the rabbis even see a play on word here, where that word for wrestling, vayavek, he wrestled with the angel. They say that you can also use it as a play on word for a torch, which is avuka. And they were saying this flaming minister of fire, this angel, it finally dawns on him, this is not a human being, and said there's something celestial. He's not a creation of this world. He's of a different order than a human being. And so they say this word avuka for torch. The angel tried to use that aspect of himself as a flaming minister of fire to frighten Jacob and to try to deceive him with a fire demonstration. And why is this interesting to us? Because in Revelation, this is going to be a false sign. It's also going to be the sign of the two witnesses, but it's also going to be a false sign, a false wonder, where it's going to appear that fire comes down from heaven. And so, at least in the rabbinic tradition, there's a background for this, that Esau's angel was trying to frighten Jacob and deceive him with this demonstration of fire. The implication being that, hey, Jacob, you're not going to survive this night, and neither are your children. You're going to get cut off tonight, and I'm going to show you a fire demonstration, and you're going to think it's over. And what does this mean? That you won't last, you won't hold out till the dawn. When I have to go, the angel's like, I got to go at dawn. When the dawn breaks, that's the end of the exile of my authority, my dominion. It's over at that point. But with this fire demonstration, the idea was that Jacob would be so intimidated, he would give up. And so would his children. It was kind of like a prophetic thing that, okay, Jacob, I'm going to destroy you with fire, and your children, your descendants are also going to be destroyed with this sorcerer's fire. That's not going to happen. In the book of Revelation, those who are sealed, they're not going to be deceived by this false fire. They will prevail until the dawn. They will stand fast until the dawn, just the way our ancestor Jacob prevailed. He never lost his birthright identity. He never forgot who he was. And so if this is Esau's angel, then he represents the red one, the red beast, and his authorities are derived from the red dragon. And Jacob is apparently answering everything this angel has to throw at him. Everything the beast could throw at Jacob, he withstood. And so the message to us is, if we are the descendants of Abraham, we are also the descendants of Jacob. we're also part of the house of Israel. And we also can prevail no matter what Esau's angel, the red one, could throw at us. It doesn't matter if the red dragon gives authority to the scarlet beast in the book of Revelation. It's not our problem because we have the sword of the word. That's way better, isn't it? It's like Jacob saying, no, this is just a deception. Esau is the one who's going to be consumed by fire. He's trying to deceive me and make me think me and my descendants are going to be consumed by fire. That's not the truth. The truth is Esau, the beast, will be consumed by holy fire. And who's going to be part of that? The sons of Elohim that Yeshua was talking about when he had the Chanukah conversation in the Gospels. Remember the disputed phrase, you were sons of Elohim. Sons of Elohim. And remember, Elohim can mean judges, just like the Israelites dwelling in the wilderness. They're coming up from the wilderness. Well, if their tents are still as lovely as Balaam prophesied, that means that they have been refined in the wilderness into judges of fire, or Elohim of fire. They are not gods, but they have now become ministers of fire like angels. And so in the sight of the nations, they are going to be terrible and awesome in this holy fire, because the turning point will come where it's not a matter of, can I stand here one more day under the beast's attack? You will now go on the offensive. You will now become a judge, a minister of fire, because you refuse to give up. You would stand. And Jacob is saying, hey, look, my descendants will last through the exile. They will be redeemed by Messiah. And my descendants, my judges of fire, will consume your house, Esau. They will devour it. And this is what I think Yeshua is talking about in his sheep speech when he's challenged as to whether he's the Messiah. He's referring to the sorcery of Esau. Remember, the tradition is that, Jacob's bringing his sheep across, and then Esau's angel appears as a shepherd robber. And Jacob keeps going back all night. Apparently, this is what they believe the battle actually was. He keeps going back for sheep. And finally, he realizes these are not my sheep. My sheep know my voice. They follow me. I've been their only shepherd all their lives. My sheep know my voice. They wouldn't stay on the other side. They would come with me. They know the voice of salvation. Just like in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, after they sinned, they hid because they were afraid of the voice of salvation walking in the garden. And so it dawns on Jacob, hey, my sheep hear my voice. They follow my words. And this night robber is not going to be able to snatch them out of my hand. Likewise, Yeshua says, nobody can snatch the Father's sheep out of my hands. He's helping them, I think, take the context that they have for that all-night battle with the angel, and he's moving it into explaining who he is and saying, hey, look, if you can't hear me, maybe you're one of Esau's sheep. Maybe you're the sheep of a sorcerer. Maybe you're not my sheep, but my sheep know my voice. They're not going to listen to another, and nobody is going to be able to snatch them out of my hand. I think this is a really good place. Like, is it even possible that some other being could even disguise himself as an angel? Paul tells us it's possible in 2 Corinthians 11:12. And again, it goes back to there being people involved in the move of the Spirit who are not authentic. They are not authentic. He says, but what I am doing, I will also continue to do, so that I may eliminate the opportunity from those who want an opportunity to be regarded just as we are in the matter about which they are boasting. For such men are false apostles, deceitful workers, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. No wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Therefore, it is not surprising if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness, whose end will be according to their deeds. Deeds. This is exactly what Yeshua was saying. Judge me according to my deeds. Don't let the signs and the miracles be the deciding factor. Judge my deeds, judge my works. Well, right here, Paul is saying there will be people who walk right beside us. They will say that they are apostles. They're followers of Messiah. They will come across as angels of light. They will come across as servants of righteousness. So will they do some deeds of righteousness? Yes. They might wear tzitzit. They probably will keep the high holy days. If anybody's going to deceive us, it's not going to be with the regular stuff. They're going to have to go the extra mile to deceive us, but they're still going to try. That's why we're warned, be careful, because these men are hidden reefs at your love feasts. At the feast of Adonai is when they will show up and try to shipwreck you at a feast. And how many times have we been to a feast and walked away feeling less than fulfilled because of the interactions we had with people? They're turned out to be hidden reefs at those appointed times. And he says, okay, well, these things, they have to expose themselves because they're going to come across as angels of light. But the end will be according to their deeds. So we know that these deeds of righteousness that they walked in were not authentic. They were merely to deceive. And they were probably deceived themselves. So many times we're deceived into thinking we're walking in righteousness when we're just walking in our own pride. We're walking in our own ego. And so he said they have to be exposed. And the way that they will be rewarded, or the way that, the way that's going to come back to them is, he says, it's according to their deeds. Because remember, you have to evaluate a person over time. And that's why I say they cannot sustain obedience long term. They can disguise themselves short term. But given time and pressure, their deeds will be exposed. And so we need to expect that Esau is going to send out false shepherds who are robbers. They might deceive people with signs and miracles. And I think this is why Yeshua did say, you can believe me because of the signs, but the signs are basically for idolatrous people. He says, a wicked and foolish generation seek after the signs. The sign we should be looking for is, am I, or am this other sheep I'm concerned about, is this person walking in the word? Do they follow after the voice of the word sustainably? Doesn't mean you never make mistakes, but it means they prove themselves by their deeds over time. And Messiah says, I'm going to be identified by how I perform the word of the Father. And that's what he says, Matthew 16:4. He says, a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it, except the sign of the prophet Jonah. And he left them and departed. That's harsh. That's harsh. Especially, I think we've all had doubts, like, how will I know? What if Messiah comes back and I don't recognize him? How am I going to be able to tell? Because we're told there's going to be lots of Messiahs or people claiming to be Messiahs. Would I be deceived if somebody did something spectacular and said he was the Messiah, but he really wasn't? Would I be wicked and adulterous and seek after some sign that would just dupe me into following a false Messiah? So Yeshua, he's giving us information to help us make good decisions. But you got to admit, that's kind of harsh. A wicked and foolish generation seeks after a sign. But if we understand his context, he's not just talking to the people asking for a sign. He's referring them again back to the Israelites in the wilderness. Who is this coming up from the wilderness? Well, lots of people didn't. Lots of people didn't get refined into the scented powders of the merchant. Some people died in the wilderness as the dust of Abraham, because there was a generation of adultery from the word that did not exit the wilderness alive. Numbers 14:11, the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people reject me? And how long will they not believe me with all the signs which I have performed among them? So we see shelf life of a sign is pretty short. If you're relying on the sign and you need the sign to believe, how long will that last? Well, in the wilderness, it didn't last long. He's like, I've done sign after sign after sign after sign, and they still don't believe me. So you don't want to be the person who seeks after the sign in order to believe, because your shelf, it's just not shelf stable, if we want to put it that way. And so Yeshua doesn't put emphasis on the signs, but upon the truth of the word. He says, this is how you're going to be able to tell. And the works of righteousness. And again, you need to check long term. Anybody can be obedient short term, but put them under pressure and add time, and you'll see what leaks out. Is it obedience or is it wickedness? And so as we go back to his Chanukah statement of I and the Father are one, that's the truth of the works of righteousness. When we do works of righteousness, it's because we are one with Yeshua, and Yeshua is one with the Father. Yeshua is doing the works of the Father. That's how we know he's the Messiah. A Messiah who cannot do the works of the Father long term, who starts leaking out wickedness, we know this is not a Messiah. But Yeshua is saying, hey, look, you can't even convince me of sin. He challenged them one time, like, which one of you is going to convince me of sin unless you bring a false witness? Nobody. And he tells them in John 8:45, because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. And then John 10:37, he says, if I do not do the works of my Father, do not believe me. He's saying this is what you should believe, not the sign and the wonder. Look for this first. Look to see if I'm doing the works of the Father. Because if I'm not doing the works of the Father, don't believe. But if I do, though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and believe that the Father is in me and I in him. Okay, he's saying believe the works. He's not necessarily saying see the miracles. He's not saying see the signs and the wonders. He's saying believe the works. This is how you're going to know. John 14:11, he says, believe me that I am in the Father and the Father in me, or else believe me for the sake of the works themselves. Right? So what are these works that he keeps talking about? He's not saying, again, signs, wonders, and miracles. Let's look it up. So we'll know. If he left us a pattern to go by, we ought to know what it is. Going forward, if the footsteps of Messiah are upon us, and maybe they are, we should know these things so we won't be deceived. So I think this is critical right here. He's pointed it out too many times. He says, believe the works, believe the works, believe the works. If you have to believe the sign and the wonder, okay, but just understand that's going to put you in jeopardy of being deceived. by an anti-Messiah, by a deceiver. So he's saying, I've done works. Believe that. That's Greek, Strong's 2041, and the word is ergon. In fact, the word ergo, if you ever see that in academic literature, it's the same word, basically, ergo. But what we did is we went to the Septuagint and we looked for where this Greek word ergon was used and looked for Hebrew equivalents. Which Hebrew words had been translated into ergon in the Septuagint? Well, there's more than one Hebrew word. Avodah was one Hebrew word. That's a word almost everybody knows if they've studied a little bit of Hebrew, avodah. Po'al and malacha, not like an angel, it's a different word, malacha, and ma'aseh. And so I gave you the briefest definition of each one of those. Yeshua is saying, believe these things right here: avodah, malacha, po'al, and ma'aseh. Don't believe the sign or the wonder, because that might be the trap. Believe his avodah. Avodah is everyday work. It's the work you do every day when you go to work. It's your customary thing that you do every single day. It's your occupation. And what did Yeshua say? I'm working. This is my occupation. I'm doing the work, the everyday work of the Father. So the everyday work of the Father should be done in your everyday life. It can also refer to the holy service of the Mishkan, because it's still a level of customary work, but it's done in a special place where Israel is gathered. So it can refer to secular work, or it can refer to holy work. But it's what is customary. It's what is expected in terms of your occupation, your labor, your service. Malacha, that can also be everyday work, but it's kind of a specialized category, especially in rabbinic literature, where there's lots of do's and don'ts on Shabbat work. So they distinguish malacha as the everyday work that you would not be permitted to do on Shabbat. Right? So again, Yeshua is emphasizing the work you do day after day after day, not how you necessarily act when you come into congregation on Shabbat. Because anybody can come in for one day and pose for a few hours and say the right prayers and pat people on the back and bring a nice roast for oneg. But malacha, it's everyday work. If I go to your work site, or if I go to your home and see how you're working around your home, what would I see? Would the Father's will be reflected in your everyday work? Are you keeping the commandments in your everyday occupation? Po'al is a work of Adonai's hands, particularly of justice. Justice. Are you doing justice? Are you fair? Are you fair-minded? Especially because it can refer to the work of Adonai's hands, especially when you're in a position of power over other people. You might be a boss, you might be a supervisor, you might be a landlord, you might be, anything that would give you some power or influence over other people. Do you use that position or that power to do justice, or do you take advantage of people? When Yeshua had the opportunity of authority, he took the opportunity to do works of justice. Works of justice. Remember the Gentile woman who wants healing for her daughter. And she's like, hey, even the little dogs get scraps. That's justice. And he's like, you're right. He didn't preclude the Roman soldier who says, hey, you don't have to come to my house. You just speak the word and I know my servant will be healed. He's like, yeah, I got the power to do that. This is great faith that you have. So Poal, that's going to be probably the closest definition here to a sign or a wonder. Ma'aseh is an occupation or a skill. Again, it's your everyday occupation, but it has a little special use that I think is important. Ma'aseh describes the inscribing of the Torah by the hand of Adonai. That first set of tablets, it says it was the ma'aseh, it was the work of the hand of Adonai. So doing the work of Adonai's hand is a ma'aseh. So as we take those 4 words that are encompassed by the Greek ergon that Yeshua is saying he did, and if he's speaking Hebrew, we don't know which one of those words he used. So we're just going to look at all of them. Notice that none of those focuses on the miraculous, except possibly Poal, because sometimes that'll be used to describe Adonai's particular justice. But he's saying the everyday deeds that I do, my everyday occupation, I am occupied with the works of the Father. This is what you should believe. This should be heavier in your eyes than some miraculous sign. The fact that I could multiply fish or bread should count less. The fact that I can heal a lame person should count less. The fact that I could heal a leper should count less. The fact that I could resurrect somebody from the dead should count less than the fact that I'm doing the work of the Father every single day. Whether it's in my secular occupation, 6 days a week, whether it's what I do on Shabbat, whether it's when I'm in a position of power or authority over somebody, I'm doing the works of the Torah. I'm doing those works that were inscribed by the hand of the Father. This is weighty. And if you can do these things, then you won't be fooled when some so-called Messiah comes in doing signs, wonders, and miracles, and yet he can't do this day after day. He cannot do the works, he cannot do the deeds of the Father. Because what we will do, especially if we're in pain, especially if we're in grief, if we're in despair, if we're in a state of worry, and apparently, according to something I saw today in the United States, we're more worried about our future than we've ever been before. We don't think things are going to get better as a nation. I'm like, well, they won't get better before they get worse. That's probably right. But what will happen often is when we reach that state of despair, that's when the anti-Messiah will come in. That's when the beast will come in and do a sign or a wonder or a miracle. That's when somebody will come in who we think represents us. And that's the danger. I was watching last week a program, a biography on not the Shah of Iran, but his wife. And we know, of course, Iran is ancient Medo-Persia. It's the lion. Well, the bear, but the bear came out of the lion. And if you're old enough to remember when the Shah's regime fell, and that's when the religious fanatics took over, that's when the Americans were taken hostage by university students in Tehran, how a nation welcomed in a despot. And it's never been the same since. It's a beautiful country. It's beautiful people. Beautiful poetry, beautiful literature. And overnight, it was clamped down. Remember how we talked about how the cups stack up? Well, this is not on the scale of the 4 kingdoms at this point, because Persia has already had its cup emptied out. But in terms of a smaller regime, There's still a prince of Persia. It's just that he kind of got set down. But even within that, there's going to be power struggles in terms of religion and so forth. And so what happened was overnight, that cup was poured out again. A country that was moving in a fairly modern direction, all of a sudden it was flipped over. And now you've got a religious fanatic, and well, a collection of religious fanatics running a beautiful country into the ground. And here is, they interviewed the Shah of Iran's wife, and she said something that is exactly this idea of how an antichrist can step in. When we're in a state of fear for the future, when we don't like the way things are going around us, when we feel threatened, we will look for a savior. So, and I transcribed this myself. I just had to keep stopping the video to get it transcribed. But what she said, I thought every word here counts, because she's describing how people followed after an anti-Messiah and ruined a nation. She said, the Iranian government, the Shah, and his many followers were helpless in the face of the increasing acclaim for the new savior, Khomeini. It was the beginning of the end. They saw Khomeini as a Che Guevara type of character who had been martyred by the emperor, that he was forced to leave Iran and he was in exile. So there was this romance around Khomeini that obscured his own speeches and his writing. And I think it's fair to say that many of his young supporters did not understand what he was saying. Many of them actually believed that his most famous statement, the Valayat Faqid, which develops the thesis of Islamic government, his young supporters believed that this was a forgery produced by the Shah and by the Savak, the internal police, to discredit Khomeini. They couldn't believe that anything so extreme could come from this grandfatherly figure. So there was a sort of willful denial. It is something we've seen in other revolutionary situations. You want to believe, you project your dreams and ideals onto this distant figure, and then when he steps onto this stage, you are presented with someone and something very, very different. And the title of the program was Faradiba Pahlavi, the Last Empress. But I thought, man, this is profound, because remember, we talked about the mofet, the wonder. And the idea about a wonder is that it's beautiful, it's romantic, it's handsome, it's attractive. And she says that, especially the young people of Iran, they had romanticized this religious cleric to the point they were reading his speeches and his writing, the things that he was writing, and they weren't seeing what was there on the page. And she said they didn't understand what he was saying, and it was right there on the page. And she says it's like every other revolution you see. You want to believe, and so you project your dreams and ideals onto some figure. And then when you get it, you find out he's not who you thought he was, because he was simply a representation of what you wanted. He became an idol. You idolized in him the qualities that you thought would make you safe, secure, and that's danger. And look how it's changed, not just the course of one country, it's changed the course of world history up to this point. And this is what happens, I think, when we look in Revelation and we see the beast, we see the false messiahs, we see the deceptions and so forth. It's because exactly this process is what happens. People become unhappy with the chaos around them, And they just simply project onto a certain person their own dreams and ideals to the point that they're deceived and they can't even evaluate the very words coming out of the man's mouth. You don't hear what he's saying. You don't see what he just wrote. And it kind of goes back to watch this person over time. Don't accept the new thing, the beautiful thing, the just what I wanted thing without some evaluation. Evaluate the words and evaluate the works. Because had they evaluated the works, they would have seen he was not doing the works of the Father. He was not writing the words of the Father. He was not speaking the words of the Father. And then we're stuck with him. So we don't have to make that same mistake. We can do exactly what Yeshua told us to do. This statue right here, I thought was interesting. At the end of the program, she would go to this park. She lives in France. She would visit this park and look at this statue frequently because, of course, the lion represents the death of the kingdom and the death of the Shah to her. But this is pretty much any world leader. If we're looking at a human being and we're projecting ourselves onto that leader and thinking this leader will deliver to me exactly what I want, and I'm willing to overlook lying, cheating, adultery, you name the list of broken commandments. If I already know this about this man or woman, it could be a woman. If I already know this about this person, I better be pretty careful how much trust I put into them, because I've just made them into an idol. If I'm willing to overlook the fact that he's not doing the works of the Father. Yeshua says, believe me because I do the works of the Father. Don't believe me because of a sign, a wonder, a miracle, unless that's the last resort. But it's going to be so dangerous to do that. Look for the works of the Father first. Now, are we stuck with leaders that don't do the works of the Father? Yes. Yes. And at this point, I don't know that they're even claiming to do the works of the Father. They're only claiming to do the works that you want them to do, which makes them fit that role pretty well, right? If they're just going to do whatever the voters tell them to do, there's nothing there. There's no integrity there. I want somebody who says, I'm going to do the works of the Father, no matter who votes for me. And if that means I don't get elected, I don't get elected. I think that's what Yeshua would have said if he ever ran for office. Fortunately, he's a king. He won't have to win an election, right? It's up to us to make our calling an election sure. Okay, so let me stop this. And I'm not